Past lives. You've referred to it many times. Does this concept really exist, or is it a metaphor only? I have difficulty relating to this concept. Can you elaborate on this topic?
Sure. Past lives, sure, past lives exist. Now, it depends on how you have the concept. It's just a database. You know, the past exists. We do have a history. Now, an individual, so what you're probably saying is, does reincarnation exist? Do we actually go around again? Okay. Obviously, past lives exist, you know. We have history, so yes, we do have to go around more than once. And the reason for that is, and the reason we're coming to that conclusion, I guess I should say, is several things, but one is that it's efficient. To come here one time as a budding unit of consciousness and decrease your entropy significantly is a very difficult thing to do. It's a very slow process, this growing up. Okay. And then, if that was it, and then other budding consciousness come here and they get this one shot at it, and that's it. And then new ones come and they get one shot at it. What you're saying is you never graduate, you see. You're saying you have this educational system and all of this is kindergarten. And you have new 5-year-olds come in every year and they go through kindergarten, then they're gone. Ship them out some other place. You know, they're just gone, they disappear. And a new bunch of 5-year-olds come in and go through kindergarten, and then they're done. Get rid of them. New bunch of 5-year-olds, you know, you're not getting anywhere, you see. Growing up is a cumulative process. So that doesn't make any logical sense. If you have a system that's consciousness, it's evolving. We are part of the evolutionary process. Lowering our entropy helps the system lower its entropy, helps that system survive and grow. Okay, then you wouldn't have a system that was that inefficient. So the kids come and they go to kindergarten, and the next year they come and they go to first grade, and the next year they come, you see, they keep learning. Or maybe like most of us, you know, we repeat kindergarten, and then we repeat it again, and then we go to first grade, and then we repeat first grade, and then we go back to kindergarten, and so on. But still, there's a process of going up. So it only makes sense in the context of this model that you would have to have a cumulative experience, otherwise the system wouldn't be very effective. It would be a terribly inefficient learning process that says, all right, you got one chance to learn something, we're done, then we're going to start over. You know, you got one chance to learn a little so that the next time you can learn a little more. So that the next time you can learn a little more, now that is a more efficient process. So if it's a learning process, then it needs to be an iterative process. Okay, that's the thing. Now so that kind of tells you that reincarnation is a logical necessity for the success of this model, for the success of the theory. But when you have this past life, it's just a past experience. It's a chapter in your book. It's not a living, you know, it's not a living, breathing thing in the sense that all those people in the past are all still alive. And like a question I had today, and it's a very common misperception, is that, well, can I incarnate back in the past and be, you know, and go back there and have a life in the 1800s? And the answer is no. We keep going forward. That's just history. It's just history. It's just data. It's what happened. That's all. It's just a record of what happened. And then we keep iterating. We keep cycling. Remember the fluid in the entropy reduction engine, and the fluid just keeps going round and round and round, and each time it circles around, it reduces its entropy a little bit. Well, that's the concept. It requires a cycle. Okay, I think that answers it. You got another one, Beth?
Yeah, Sherry's going to make it.
Okay.
Hi. Thomas, Rosie McKnight, who was another explorer at TMI, had been using the same check unit every week, and there's a story that she had invisible helpers that would lift her body out to go on these out-of-body explorations that Bob Monroe recorded. And then one day she missed her appointment, and a stranger came in, slept in her same check unit, and suddenly had these invisible helpers pulling her body out. Can you explain kind of what happened there?
Well, there's several explanations that are possible, but one of them is that it is exactly as it sounds. You know, she had some helpers. They were pulling her out of body, and they were mistaken by grabbing somebody else. So it may be just as simple as that. You know, that could just take that at face value, that that's the way it happened. Other ways that you might want to look at it is that these helpers were one of Rosie's tools. If you would like helpers come and pull you out, then you can do that. You can create a tool where these helpers come and they grab hold of you and pull you out of body. That's going to be just as effective for many people as rolling out, you see. And if you do that and you build up that process as your tool, and you always do that in this one room, and you always do that at the same time, you kind of build that process up in the expectation of the system, right? In the probability, if you will. There's a high probability that Rosie's going to be there today at 7 o'clock and get pulled out of body, and she's got this process going. If somebody else fits in that slot, they may just kind of get that process. You see, they just may kind of be there at the right time. They can just pick up on it, and maybe it just works because it's been scheduled, because it's probable, and they just kind of stepped into somebody else's, you know, probable reality there. So it could be something as, you know, as mundane as that. But having somebody help you out is just another tool set, if you want to use it. That's like, again, that's the thing. If you don't feel like you can do it yourself, well, then you get somebody else to do it. It's the same with healing. A lot of people only heal because energy flows through them from someplace else, because that's just a better way in their worldview, in their sense, in the way they work. That just works better for them. The idea that it's coming from self may even be offensive. You know, oh, you think you're so powerful, you know, it comes from self. That's ego. You know, if it's going to come from yourself, it would be ego. So it's much better to have it come from the cosmos. Just use all the available energy and get your own ego and self out of it, you see. Some people would have that kind of a feeling, and for them, it would be ego. And for them, it's much better to have it come through from elsewhere, because it just suits them better. For others, they don't get into that, and that's okay for them. You see, everybody needs to do it in their own way, for their own reasons, for their own resonance. It's just what works for you, for whatever reason. So I think it may have well just been that somebody, you know, the system was already prompted. It was already highly likely. It was just sitting there, and it probably wasn't just paying a lot of attention. And you know, it's like you put your order in and they deliver the hamburger whether you get up and left or not. And if somebody happened to sit in your seat, well, they get your hamburger. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Tom. Thank
Hi.
you once again. You've helped me understand a lot of what I've been going through for the last 10 years. My question is, how do you hold your intent, your focus, without actually thinking about your intent? Like, you're supposed to not think, right?
Yes, that's back to the old problem of, if I get rid of my intellect, what's left? It's not thinking that you have to get rid of. It's the intellect that you have to get rid of. Left brain people can't tell the difference between thinking and their intent. In their intellect. But you exist at two levels. You exist at the being level. That's just you, who you are. That's the level at your core. Or if you like, it's your soul. Okay, that's the inner you. You also exist at this intellectual level, in this game, in this virtual reality. And the intellect is the logical processing part of our body. It's a part of us that makes excuses for us getting what it is we want. It's the process that encourages the ego and justifies it. But this intellectual process is the thing that has to be quiet. You, as a thinking being, are welcome to think through this. But you, as the thinking being, aren't going to be judging, aren't going to be analyzing, aren't going to have all that chatter going on. You, as the thinking being. So you get to this point consciousness, and all you are then is an awareness. And awareness can think. So while you're there in that point consciousness, you can say, well, what do I want to do next? You can think. You can say, well, I think I want to go see my mother who passed away 5 years ago. I'd like to talk with her. There's some issues I had I'd like to work out. And there you are. You see, so you can lead your intent You can focus your intent on whatever you want because you're thinking, but you have to do that just at the being level. When you're in your dreams, when you're dreaming, you generally interact at the being level. So when that situation happens in the dream where you react with anger or you react, it upsets you and you cry or whatever it is, that's you. That's usually right at the gut level of your existence. In dreams, you hardly ever say, well, that really upsets me, but I shouldn't be upset about that, so I'll just, put on a happy face and pretend it didn't bother me. You do that here. That's your intellect and ego. But there, typically, that's in a dream reality, when something comes and upsets you, you just react to it. It's just the real you. So the real you can still think. The intellect needs to stop fussing around and carping and judging and analyzing and that sort of thing. Okay, does that help? Yeah, good.
Last night when I left, I was rather surprised. I was walking through campus. I ended up walking through a group of people who were going to a James Randi talk. And I was wondering, have you ever had the opportunity to discuss with him and find out about his $1 million challenge? And I'm not saying I don't believe he's correct in what he does. I think he's rather close-minded, but I wondered if you'd had a chance to discuss with him.
No, I never have discussed it with him, and I doubt that such a discussion would be fruitful. Randi is a good example of skepticism without an open mind. And as I said in the opening things, that's attached to a belief of omniscience. I know everything, therefore, I don't have to open my mind to learn anything new. The Randi phenomena is mostly, from my viewpoint, from what I've seen of it, it's mostly propaganda. It's a way of convincing people and getting people to think that there is nothing in this world but the objective reality and anything else is stupid. And if you want to entertain that anything else exists, then you are stupid. So it's demagoguery at the point that if you don't agree with me, you're a fool. And that tends to affect people. And his $1 million challenge, as I have understood it and as I have read things about it, has been answered and met on numerous occasions, and no money has ever changed hands, nor will it. It's a bogus offer that is not likely to ever happen. It's part of a marketing campaign. It's not real. Randy's not out there with an open mind hoping to find something that he can spend his $1 million on that will show the world that reality is not objective. He's got a closed mind, and he doesn't expect to lose any of that money because he won't let it go. I've read several things. Some of them were on YouTube, some of them I read elsewhere, where people have done such a performance, and it was just denied. Because you can always explain anything away with a conspiracy. You see, nothing is, it's just easy to deny whatever it is you want to deny. So I think there'd be no usefulness in engaging skeptics of that sort. I think all you do is create an argument, and the argument would not actually be a real argument. It would just be demagoguery. It would be, what kind of tricks and what kind of things can I say to get the audience to see it my way? And it would be the questions like, have you stopped beating your wife? Right? So if you say yes, then you've implied you beat your wife. If you say no, it implies you still beat your wife. You see, there's no way to answer that without sounding like, something's wrong with you. So that's demagoguery, where you can use these word tricks and so on to get your point across. And so it would be more of a contest. Who could be better at the demagoguery to convince an audience to look at it their way rather than the other way? That sort of thing wouldn't interest me.
Okay, thank you very much.
Tom, I got two quick questions here. Well, hopefully they're quick. The first one's related to morality and ethics of interacting with the large consciousness system. So let's say I was adept at interfacing with the LCS, and I wanted to achieve a certain effect, and I thought it was for the greater good, but maybe that was just my opinion, and that would adversely affect other entities. So is that still achievable, or is there some safeguards for the LCS that prevents that from occurring? Yes, there's generally some safeguards that prevents that occurring.
That would be asking the larger conscious system to really act in its own disinterest, wouldn't it? It's trying to lower entropy, and by doing this thing that you want, it would actually raise entropy. Now, if that would happen to be a learning situation, if that raising of entropy would then cause a lowering of entropy, because it would cause a lesson that people could learn, it might do that anyway. But if not, it just probably wouldn't happen. So there are some safeguards on that. But let's say you asked for something and it really was your ego, but your intellect had convinced you that it was really for the good of mankind when it was really for what you wanted. And it didn't really cause a lot of distress to other people, then you're likely to get it. Or if the distress it caused to other people would be something that might help you grow. It was an opportunity for you to see, oh, now look what you've done. Look at these unintended consequences. You've created these problems, and you go, oh, I see, I need to be more careful. I need to be more focused. Then it might happen anyway, yes, because it would end up, see, it works on probability. So if the probability is that in the long run, it's going to be a win, then it'll probably happen. Or at least there's an opportunity, there's a probability for a win there, then it'll probably happen. If the probability for a win is very, very small, probably won't happen.
Okay, my next question is, it's related to if there's any wild cards in the LCS. And for example, can there be other large consciousness systems where perhaps something like love is not the answer, but maybe their objective to lower entropy is like maybe humor is the answer, or some other concept. I'm just using humor as an example. And where partitions of that large consciousness system can actually detach themselves and join the other system? Can you actually move from one system to another, or is that even?
Yeah, you can project your awareness into other reality frames. You're not stuck just in this virtual reality. There are other virtual realities, and yes, these other virtual realities are different, and they may have developed different ways of, there's different paths, if you will. I think all of them would be toward lowering entropy, but which would mean would be moving toward love. I think you'll find that fundamental across all of them. But there's many, many different paths for doing that. One of the paths for lowering entropy may be humor, or it might be, other things other than the way it's worked out in this virtual reality. So those other ways may become more dominant than what we have here. Here we're all moving toward left brain objective material reality. That's kind of the way our culture's gone. And it'll go that way until that creates enough pain that we decide that we need to move in a different direction. Other places may do things differently. I've been to realities where music was used rather than words. It was a very musical place where, I don't know, how can I say, it's almost like entities sung to each other. It was a different kind of a place than this. So music was an extremely important thing there. And it was mostly a right brain place. There wasn't a lot of logical process going on there. So there are different kinds of realities. They just evolve different ways, evolution. And you say, are there any wild cards? Yes, there are wild cards in the sense that in the evolution of this reality frame and of ourselves, one of the components is just chance. It's just randomness. Everything is not engineered for our optimal, learning opportunity. Some things are. We try to bias it that way. You try to, if you've been around the block a few times, you try to pick situations that will challenge your weak spots because that's what you need. So in some ways it's a setup, but in other ways it's just random. If you're down on the lower end of it, where you haven't been around the block very many times, you jump in and jump out. This reincarnation thing has almost no planning to it because all you need is experience. You haven't developed enough to really say, well, I'm pretty developed here, but not here, so I need to go this direction. It's just, you just need experience. So then very little planning involved. You go up to the very top of it, and you see there's lots of planning involved. People will come here with very specific missions to accomplish very specific things with very specific people, and the planning is almost to the point that it looks deterministic. I've got this this mission to do. So the planning can be a lot, or it can be almost none. The randomness can be a lot, or it can be almost none. When that sperm and egg go together and you got all these chromosomes that are, you know, how many ways, how many permutations and combinations do you get of 24 chromosomes with another, you know, then a lot of that's just chance. Sometimes it's more chance than others. Sometimes it's planned. But a lot of things, a social Brownian motion has a lot of chance in it. So there's a lot of wild cards in the sense that our experiences, to some significant extent, are just happened the way they happened. No planning involved whatsoever. We just ended up that way. Wasn't even necessarily our choice. We just happened to live in the wrong place or walk through the park on the wrong day, you know, and suddenly our life changed. So stuff happens. And that happens in a big scale too. So in a culture, in a whole reality frame like this one, it might just be chance that at the right times things happen, that here we are progressing toward an objective materialist viewpoint. Because whatever reasons, some other culture may not have had just that way that went together. You know, the timing may have been a little different, so they're headed off in some other direction. You know, it's, you know, they may be in a very dissimilar viewpoint, you know, world viewpoint. And they may have their own different kinds of problems because of that. We have ours because of what we're doing, and it's a learning opportunity for everyone, however you do it. But it's not that buttoned down. You get a disease, it doesn't necessarily mean you needed that disease, that, you know, was part of your learning. Could have been, may have just been because you know, got too close to somebody who, you know, just put a lot of bacteria in the air. The rule set, you know, goes on its way. Okay, we got another?
Well, this is quite a bit narrower focus than that question, but I'm just wondering, when you've got somebody who's got a diagnosis of sort of advanced ALS, and the doctors have said this is what you've got, and it's been written down on all kinds of places, and there's no way you're ever going to get these doctors to burn these things. Can that data or information that has been recorded be overwritten
Yes.
by the consciousness of the person, even with the support of other people?
Yes,
So-
yes, that data, you're not stuck with that. So a bunch of doctors diagnose something. Okay, I'm not sure, what is ALS?
It's a degenerative disease where
Okay.
they can't move.
Okay. Yes, there can be, you know, depends on how much uncertainty is left. The wiggle room is in the uncertainty. If it's a disease, you know, the human body is kind of a very complicated machine, and all of us are different. So you have 5 billion different complicated machines. So all sorts of strange things can happen in medicine. All kinds of strange things, like this person's going to die in 6 months, and, you know, 6 years later they're better than ever. Those things happen, and they almost happen daily. So medicine has so much uncertainty in it that even if doctors say, make a pronouncement, there's lots of wiggle room within the uncertainty because biology is so complex and the machine is so unpredictable. But now if you get a situation where here's somebody and they can't move, and okay, they got this disease, maybe, you know, multiple sclerosis, you know, and here they are and they're quadriplegic, arms don't work, legs don't work. Now, and they've been that way for a year, what's the probability that suddenly they don't have it anymore? See, there's very little uncertainty now, and there's a little wiggle room that that's just going to go away. But there's probably somebody somewhere that's been in that position and slowly got better and got over it, even though that hardly ever happens. And part of the reason of that is we saw those probability distributions. Well, okay, there's all these probabilities, and when various things can happen, and you bias it with your mind, you have maybe a good attitude, and then here's all the possibilities. You reach up in that probability distribution and you randomly pull one out. Well, remember that distribution we have, there was maybe 200 or 300 F, G's, and H's, and there was only one A. There's only one A out of 450 things. You remember that when we did that? Well, sometimes you reach in and you pull out the A. You just pull out that one A, and it's, you know, 1 in a million or 1 in 100,000 that you're going to get that. See, in that case, it was 1 in 450. But you pull out something that's really odd, And that's that odd case. That's that one that had some sort of disease like that, and for some reason just got better and got over it. But it's only one, and it's a long shot. It's a very long shot. But yes, it is possible. In a probabilistic statistical reality, almost anything is possible. Things are just more or less likely or unlikely. But almost anything is possible. But just because, if you have a bunch of doctors say that, you're gonna die in a month, that doesn't mean that. That happens probably once a day somewhere in the world. Somebody's told they're gonna die in a month, and they get over it. And everybody knows that the body is too complex and too unknown. The doctors really don't know what they're talking about half the time. They're guessing. They're just looking at statistics and saying, well, of all the people that we've seen that have this, most of them die in a month. That's all they're saying. But it's a probability distribution. Sometimes you grab out from under the tail. Sometimes you grab out from under the other tail and you don't even last a month. You die in 3 days. That happens too.
Sorry, I heard you talking about conspiracy theories throughout the weekend.
Yeah, I mentioned it once or twice.
Yeah, and I guess I just feel like there is some validity to some of them, because there are a lot of rich people who've been rich for a long time and kind of like get together and chat about what they should do to make sure that they remain rich and to get more rich. So I was just hoping you could comment on that.
Well, I will tell you, of course there are conspiracies. Just the comments I had about conspiracy theories is that you can use a conspiracy theory to justify anything. It's one of those things that if you get to make up what all the other people did, to make it happen the way it is, that's easy to do. That doesn't mean there's no such thing as conspiracies. Of course there can be conspiracies, and of course people band together to put forth their own self-interest. And if those people happen to have a lot of power and a lot of influence, then you get something that can move things. There's no doubt about that. We can come up with lots of people who conspire to manipulate us. Media would be one. We don't have to talk about rich people. Advertisers would be two. We can kind of go on down the list. Anybody that's selling anything, would be another. There's lots of people who would like to conspire to take advantage of us, to get some dollars out of our pocket. But sure, no, I didn't mean to say that all conspiracies are silly. Lots of conspiracies have something to them, but there's a whole lot that are just made up because people are fearful. And this is a way of explaining the awful things that happen to you so that you don't have to take responsibility for them. You blame them on somebody else. That happens a lot too. It's just that you can find, particularly on the web, you can go to the web and you can find a conspiracy about everything. Men never landed on the moon. There were never any dinosaurs. All those are made up. They're plastic bones. And it just goes on and on and on. And most of it, I guess I've learned to take almost everything I read and hear anywhere with a lot of skepticism. Okay, we got another one.
My question is about negative entities or parasites that you mentioned in exploring the non-physical reality. And when you call out and you say hello, is it important to filter or to say hello to only entities that are interested in my best good? Can the negative ones even sense you if you're vibrating high or you're focused more on love? And can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. It is good to say those little affirmations. It depends on the individual, how necessary they are. If you have some fear, particularly that there may be a problem, then saying an affirmation will help put you at ease and eliminate some of that fear, then that's good. You should say them. In general, even if you don't have any fear, it doesn't hurt. After a while, that just becomes an automatic thing. It's almost, you don't really have to voice it so much as it's just your intention. Your intention is, I want to only speak to those who might have information that's useful to me, or that is for my best good, or for the good of the whole, or some kind of thing like that, some kind of affirmation. That becomes like an intent at a automatic level. You just have that about you all the time. Because there's a lot of riffraff out there that you just as soon not engage with. And if you have that attitude as an intent, it's just an attitude. If you have that attitude as intent, then mostly all that riffraff will leave you alone. So you don't really have to voice it, but yes, it's good to have an intent like that. And if voicing it makes it clearer and more succinct in your mind, it helps you focus that intent, it's a good thing to do. I think you'll see that after you've voiced it a few hundred times, it's just no longer necessary to voice it. It's just there. It's just the way you feel. It's your intent. Go on. So you don't have to always say an affirmation, but you should kind of feel that way. And you should always be fearless. You should never go there if, the things frighten you, because then that will attract things to you that will help you manifest that fear. You create what you fear.
I apologize if you've already answered this question. I put it in the box yesterday and then I had to leave a little bit early. So I don't want you to have to answer it again if you don't want to.
Well, that's all. Go ahead and ask it.
The question was, on Friday night, you said once a particle, always a particle. Mm-hmm. And my understanding has been that quantum energy can morph into and out of particle and wave, and that ultimately everything dissolves back into the quantum field anyway. And so I understand the concept of sort of a temporary freezing of a particle in historical time as a piece of data, and that data set hypothetically is held, in the virtual reality, etc. But I'm not sure that sufficiently explains for me your comment, once a particle, always a particle.
Okay, that comment, and when we talked about reverse causality, recall that I said that data can come in and leave, and we talked about the bear in the woods and the tree, that you can bring data into this reality and then that kind of fixes it, but then that data can go out of this reality. It's the same with the particle and the double slit. Once you measure that you have a particle going through that slit, at that point the particle can't do anything between then and the screen that's right on the other side but hit it in a straight line. That's its only option. At that point, you've measured the particle, and then suddenly this particle just disappears. That sort of thing would not be allowed, because then you have two pieces of information, that it's here and it's not here at the same time. But now, let's say you have that particle, or not necessarily going through a double slit, but you're following some electron around. You've got some particle and you're manipulating it, and then you let it go. It gets away from you. Well, it's probability again. It's no longer a particle. It's back into the field. So it's the amount of uncertainty with it. As long as there's the uncertainty of where that particle is real tiny, then that particle stays within that uncertainty. As soon as the uncertainty of that particle gets big again, well, then we don't know where it is again. It's gone. It's back into it's back to the future. So things can come and go. And in that particular experiment that I showed on Saturday, where they had the particles come in and then have the entangled pairs go. Well, the thing that was nice about that is this was the first experiment where they did erasure, where the experimenter didn't manipulate the erasure. You see, the quantum chose where it went everywhere. In the whole experiment, there were 5 detectors, or there were 4 detectors there, and where any of those particles went, had no hands applied. No experimenter had anything to do with it. So the particle came in there as probability, and probability flowed through that whole system, and where it happened to show up as particles was purely statistical. Quarter of the time it showed up here and here. All 4 got a quarter of the hits. And which hits went where and why? Untouched by human hands. It was done entirely, and yes, so that showed that some of the particles sometimes were some of them were particles, some of them were waves, and how they decided where they went was entirely on their own. And you didn't really know until it hit those 2 detectors that decided which split it was. And if it went to the ones that erased it, you had no idea. You couldn't say that those didn't disappear before they got erased, because once it's erased, as far as you're concerned, they didn't, you don't know what slit they went from. It's just, and you get 2 counts there. You still get the same number of counts. Every particle in had 1 particle out. It's an in and out had to match. So you send in a photon here, one of these 4 detectors gets a hit on it. You send in another one of these 4 detectors gets a hit on it. It's like that. So there's always 1 in and 1 out. So in that way you don't lose anything in the counting. But where it hits and where it went was choice of the random selection of the possibilities. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I agree. Things can come and go out of the quantum stew, if you will. But once you isolate one, and it's here, and you follow it here, and you follow it here, and you know it has to go there because it's been collimated to this narrow little path that's only one trajectory possible, could get it to this point, and you know where that is, and you know exactly what slit it went through, so you've narrowed its uncertainty down to a very small number, then you've got it. It's going to stay that way, okay? And it's going to act like a particle. Now you lose track of it. It's no longer a particle. So that's what I mean. When it comes in, it's a particle, but it has to do with uncertainty. It's not that that little particle now has to wander around in this universe by itself being a particle. As soon as you lose track of it, it's gone. It's no longer a particle. It's just part of the statistical mass again.
Thomas, a couple questions, if I may. One has to do with past life regressions. Clinicians have used past life regressions. It's been documented that they can take their subject to past lives and potentially cure an ailment in this lifetime based on some past event. So when I think about that, I would have a perspective that those past lives exist as a true historical record. When you talk about probability, is there a chance that the past life was actually a non-actualized record? It was actually something not true to the current lifetime, but actually another path that could have been taken out of the probability bucket, I guess. And could someone then go to that past life that didn't really exist in their true timeline? And if it really matters, from the perspective of what you gained as a benefit from that?
It probably does matter, but to a lesser degree. You see, the history that you actualized was the most likely. Okay, so that's the most likely event, so that's what you did. And the fact that you chose it meant that it was, actually the most likely. Now, let's say there's something that you didn't do, but was almost as likely. Or maybe there's several things you did that were almost as likely. Let's say you almost choked somebody to death because you were that angry, but you didn't actually choke them to death in this history. But you just came that close. The difference there could have gone either way at that time, you see? But you didn't do it in this history thread. But in the unactualized thread, oh yeah, you choked them. That was only a hair's breadth different probability than the one that was actualized, where you didn't choke them. Or maybe you wanted to choke them, but you slipped before you got hold of them, and then after that your anger passed a little bit, whatever happened. Well, then that wasn't actualized. Does that mean that your entity then in the next lifetime does not still have this thing about anger that makes you almost want to choke somebody? Sure, that's still a problem to deal with. And if you regressed in a past life and got back to that thing and you say, you lost it and you choked somebody, and maybe that would help them get over it by realizing that this anger problem was the way it was. Maybe get them back in touch with that problem so that they could see the fear or whatever was driving it, help them get over it. Sure. So yeah, what's in the unactualized past is still pertinent to what's going on. But now you get something that's at the 10 to the minus 3 or 10 to the minus 4, that might have happened. Okay, you were angry at somebody, but you never would have choked them. Well, 10 to the minus 5, one in 100,000, maybe you would have choked them. Maybe you're having a really bad day and, whatever else you may have. So it's very unlikely though, you see. Now, is that going to affect what's going to happen? No, it's inconsequential. Doesn't make any difference. So yeah, I can see that sometimes it would. Probably most of the time it's a weak player, but it could be a pretty strong player. It's still you see. You are all of it. You are all of that probability. You're the one that actually didn't do it, but you're also the one that almost did. And how does that probability curve go? Was the reason that you didn't choke somebody good luck? Was that the low probability? That may have been out under the tail. You just happened to luck out that somehow you got distracted or you slipped on a banana peel or something happened and you didn't murder them. You see? So actualized, you can say, well, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. Doesn't matter. All of it's you. So you see, you still may be homicidal even though you actually didn't do it. So Does that answer that question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
One more. The other one is I am confused about individual consciousness units and the larger consciousness unit, and specifically to when you spoke of earlier, for example, guides. There's actually another entity that we can communicate with. But you also mentioned that we're all one.
Right.
And if there is a larger consciousness unit, and we are part of that larger consciousness unit, how and where does the individual conscious unit play or interact? Or does it really exist?
Yeah, we're individual. Let's say, look at your body. This is one body, right? It's one thing. Okay, and I am a unit. My body here. I'm a single entity, but yet I've got arms and legs and ears and all kinds of pieces. Okay, now these are pieces of me. Now, do I say that I'm really a collection of 50 things, 2 arms, 2 legs, a nose, 2 ears, whatever, we can list them all up, and that's what I am, or now we have to go to the cellular level, how about all the organs too? Where do we break down what's me? We can go to the cellular level and say, well, you're actually, 35 billion cells, and they're all playing together nicely, but mainly we just say this is just one thing, we're all one. The right hand and the left hand, they're all one. Well, it's sort of like that. You're just a piece, an extension, a part of a bigger thing. You're not really separate, just like your arm is not really separate from you, your body. It's just attached, it's connected, it's a part of the whole you, it's part of the expression of you in this form. Well, that's the way we're all one. Okay, but that doesn't mean that there are differences. Your ear is different than your arm. There are some differences in this one thing. So what happens is that there's this one consciousness, and because of its need to evolve and lower its entropy, it finds it useful to divide and conquer, if you will. It divides into pieces, gives the pieces free will, lets them interact. So now it's got a whole bigger selection of choices and novelty and things to do that it didn't have before. But still, you're just a part of it. So all right, we'll put a sock puppet on this hand, a sock puppet on this hand, and then we'll have a play, right? And we'll let them talk to each other. It's that sort of thing. It's still all one. It's still all one thing, but it allows for more novelty. So you're one now. So here you are. What are you? You are data. You're history. Remember all those probabilities, the one that choked and the one that didn't. You're all those probabilities, everything all together. Every feeling, emotion, thought, want, need, desire, thing that you did, things that you didn't do, things that you could have done but didn't. It's all there. That's you, and that sums all of you up. And it's your ability to process how much you've learned, your entropy level, everything that describes anything about you. And it's that data set. So there you are in that data set, and you're like an arm to the larger consciousness system. You're just a piece of it. You don't have free will, just like my arm doesn't have free will, because you're just a part of the consciousness system. The consciousness system has free will. I have free will, but my arm doesn't. My arm's a part of me. You're a part of the larger consciousness system. You don't have free will. But now we want to put you to work. We want to put you to work helping the system lower entropy. So we take you out, we take your little database, we take you out, and we throw you in a virtual reality where you can experience. So now you're in a virtual reality. There's a piece, when I say you are, a character with a data, with a profile, okay, with a record like yours, is put into the virtual reality and has to interact there and grow and lower its entropy. Now, as soon as you go into that virtual reality, you have a free will. You are able to choose, because now you're put in a position of choices. You're not just a piece of the history, you're not just a data file, but you're an inactive character in a virtual reality. Okay, now what if you don't go into this virtual reality? What if you go into some virtual reality like we get into when we go out of body? You're just out there, floating around in the out-of-body place, doing whatever you do, hanging out, with the guys on the corner. Well, okay, that's another virtual reality. The dream reality is another virtual reality. They're all, any reality that is experiential, that you experience in it, that's a virtual reality. If you're not in an experiential reality, you've got no experience. You're just a data set. That data set doesn't need free will. It's just a data set. Get into a virtual reality of any sort, doesn't have to be this one or one like it. It could be, out in locale 3 or something. But get into a virtual reality, and now you have choices. You interact with choices, and you can lower your entropy. Now, let's say I got this character, I'm playing this character, and this character's winning points for me. You know, he's low in its entropy, it's helping me out a lot, so why would I take him and put him on the shelf and not play him? Well, I wouldn't. I'd keep that character in a virtual reality all the time. I say, oh, you're done with that one? Good, go back again, you know, just keep at it, keep working at it, keep growing up. You're a successful character. You're gaining me points, you see. You're gaining me a lower entropy. So I'm going to work you all the time. The time that you spend sitting on the shelf just waiting to see if I want to play you, you see, is 0. So if you succeed, you're engaged all the time. You get done with one incarnation, you go back into the next, you get done with that. So basically you spend all your time with free will because you spend all your time in one virtual reality or the other because you're making progress, you're working, you're succeeding. You can take some data sets that aren't successful. Well, sometimes if it's pull them out of the system and you may not want to play them. You may want to see if maybe you'll delete them. You know, maybe you'll see if you can't think up something that might help them out. You know, give them a few extra hit points, you know, or give them a new spell or something to put them out there and see if they won't do better. Or maybe you'll say, well, they really got going down the wrong way. Let's erase that part of their memory, you know, let's just take that away. Let's cut that out and send them back out there again. But most of the time, you know, all of us here in the room, surely, we're just going around in a circle helping the system evolve because that's what we do. Does that help you? Good.
Hi, Tom.
Hello.
I have 2 questions. The first one, I've kind of been, you know, kind of looking for some kind of concept within your big toe to deal with multiple dimensions, and I did catch a little bit of a Seth sort of quote from you earlier today, but I guess my question that I wrote down was, does your big toe discuss the idea of multiple dimensions, or does it assume that multiple dimensions are within this larger consciousness system?
Yeah, larger dimensions are within the larger consciousness system. So I would say that what I'm calling a reality frame, you could call that a dimension. You know, it begs the question, you know, what is a dimension? Well, in my mind, a reality frame is a dimension. So it's a different virtual reality is what we'd call dimensions. So we are multidimensional beings. That's what Seth said. He said, we're all multidimensional beings. And Seth was the first book I read. It was Seth Speaks, was the first book I read that really made sense. I read a whole lot of books when I was first getting going with Bob Monroe back in the early 70s, and I wanted to read everything I could about it. I read some Eastern philosophy, and that made sense. But as far as a book that wasn't so much philosophy, but rather as here's how it worked book, you know, here's how it works kind of book, Seth was the first of those that really said something to me. And some of it didn't compute with me, but a lot of it did. So I have a warm feeling for Seth. But some of the things in Seth aren't quite right. And the reason they're not quite right is not because Seth didn't quite know what he was saying, but it's because in a medium, you know, relationship where a medium's delivering something, you have to translate. The medium gets the information and has to translate that information into their own words, into their own interpretations and their own concepts. And as much as that medium has a good range of concepts that can explain, and you know, has a good set of metaphors that can explain the information, you get really good data. But in as much as the data you have data that medium doesn't have a good set of metaphors or good ways of putting it together to say it, you get garbled data. And very seldom is that kind of relationship, you know, perfect. You get little problems with it, come and go. Seth Speaks was very good, you know. And all in all, I give Jane Roberts high marks for Seth Speaks. But there were a few things that got confused there. Like one of the things Seth says is that everything happens at the same time. So that's a Seth statement. That's a Jane statement, really. Everything happens at the same time, and everything's simultaneous. Okay, there is no time really. Time doesn't tick because everything's simultaneous. Everything happens at once. It's just not so. That's not logical at all. What happens is you have to have time. You have to have sequence of events. If you don't have a sequence of events, you don't have a before and after. If you don't have a before and after, you can't learn anything. You cannot evolve. All you can have is static. If there is no time ticking. If we don't have now, and then after now, and then after now, nothing can ever change. See, change itself implies time. There's no change without time. And everything doesn't happen at the same time, because then you wouldn't have any learning. Learning is sequential. You learn this, and from that you build on that learning to learn, you extend that learning to learn this, which extends that learning. Learning is cumulative. If everything happens at the same time, then there is no such thing as learning. So it's not that way. One of the fundamental things fundamental technologies that consciousness system evolved was time. And the reason it evolved time as a fundamental technology is that time gives you another whole dimension of possibility, another whole dimension of complexity. So let's say here we are in consciousness, we've got a bunch of ones and zeros, and we've got patterns, and we've got patterns of patterns, and patterns of patterns of patterns, and we're doing all this intricate information in patterns of ones and zeros. But time gives us sequences of patterns. Now we can sequence things. And because we can sequence things, suddenly we have process. Process requires time. Now we have something that can lead to something else, that can lead to something else. And we end up with causality. So time, you see, gives you a lot of things. It gives you change, it gives you process, it gives you causality, it gives you learning, and time has to go on, and it has to be cumulative. But I know exactly what Seth was trying to say and what he intended to say, but I think Jane didn't quite get it. And that is that you have this probable future database, you have the present, you have the historical database, both actualized and unactualized, and all of that exists at the same time. So you have the past, you have the present, you have the future, and it's all there. And you can go there anytime you want. You can go to the past, you can go to the future, you can have all this data across all time, in the database is available to you. And I think Seth was working down that line, and I think Jane got it, and there's no time, everything's right now, past, present, and future. Well, in a way it is if you're talking about the databases. Everything is here right now, past, present, and future. But that's not the big picture. That's just the picture around this virtual reality. It's the past, present, and future of this virtual reality. It's like that. But yet this virtual reality, you see, is just one drop in a larger bucket. There's other virtual realities, other places. So I think it was just a misunderstanding. But yes, we are multidimensional beings. We are in this reality. We're in dream reality. We're in out-of-body reality. We visit these places, talk with these people. These are all different dimensions of us. They're pieces of us. We're consciousness, and consciousness lives in a big space. And once you know your consciousness and you start to become consciousness at that level, your awareness grows. When your awareness grows, your information grows. When your information grows, your decision space grows. Now your free will has got a lot of decisions, a lot of growth, a lot of opportunity. The whole thing makes you eventually live in these multiple dimensions, awake in these multiple dimensions all at the same time. So you can be here, there, and several other places at once as truly a multi-processing, functional being across many reality frames. That's what you are when you grow up.
Okay, thanks. My second question. You mentioned, I think yesterday, that you don't like to use the term God or creator or whatever, just because it has certain connotations with it. But if it's okay, I'll use the word God in my question.
Sure. Help yourself.
So in your big theory of everything, would you consider God to be the larger consciousness system to which we belong? Or is God sort of that entity that pushed the button and created the virtual reality?
Well, I would say the first, using your terminology. The reason I say that is that the difference is, see, the way I see it is that the larger consciousness system evolved. It wasn't made. It wasn't just created. It evolved. It started with some potential energy that got a 1 and a 0, and then it got lots of 1s and 0s, and it evolved over time, because time has changed. That's how it kind of invented first crude time. And it's just a natural system, okay? Now that begs the question of, well, where did that come from, right? You can back up another thing. And that's why I put up that slide that says there's a limit to our knowledge. You know, we get to a point we just can't see there. You know, we're the bacterium in the gut, and we just don't know anything about horses and plows. And though horses and plows are very important to us because that's where the food comes from that we do work on. That does come into our reality. So just because it's out there beyond our knowing doesn't mean it's not significant to us or not even critically significant to us. But we just don't know. Okay, so now if we want to say all those things out there that we don't know, that's God, or that could be, or postulate that, it's a metaphor. If you want to use a metaphor of God to say that's the stuff that's outside this, you know, the land where we can't know, that's okay. You know, it's not a bad metaphor. I don't use the term not because I think it's a terrible metaphor, it's just that it's too confusing. When you say the word God, you've got, half the people in here, or most of the people in here would have a different definition of what that meant. So it's just not wise to use words that everybody has a different definition of it. It's good to use things that everybody kind of agrees on. So I make up my own terms, I define them, and then guess what? Everybody agrees on them because I made them up and there isn't any baggage or anything attached to them. So that's why I tend to make up my own terms. So if you think of the larger consciousness system as God, then it kind of fits the traditional definitions of theology and of gods. You get a larger consciousness system, and it's more or less omniscient. Now we've just limited ourselves. Right now we're talking about this virtual reality and all the people in it and who have ever been and will be or whatever. You know, we're in this virtual reality. So from our perspective, this larger conscious system knows everything, has all the data. Right? They know all the data. Okay, this larger conscious system is kind of connected to all of us. We're it. It's us. We're all one. Okay, this larger consciousness system can manipulate, can nudge, can kind of make things happen, and it can do strange things. You know, people can suddenly get well or suddenly get sick, or all sorts of things happen in this system, and it could be that the system nudges. It could be synchronicity. So we have an interactive play going on there. You know, what are the other typical attributes of God? You know, God is love, right? It's all about love. It's about growing up. So if you want to take all those attributes, you can say the larger consciousness system from a, abstract look, looks and sounds an awful lot like what many people think of as the attributes of God. So in that case, yes, you'd say the larger conscious system is God, but you know, I'd rather say the larger conscious system is just an evolving real system. Now there's a few things that people think about God that I wouldn't put with the larger conscious system. One is God's infinite. Larger conscious system is not, it's real. Okay, anything infinite is not real. Infinity is an abstraction. Take anything that's infinite and add something to it, it's bigger. Well, it wasn't infinite then, was it? You can make anything can grow. This larger consciousness system is growing. It's not static. Theology may have a God as being static. You know, it's just there. It doesn't change. Well, this system is evolving. It's alive. It's growing. It's becoming. And we're part of that process. So those two would be different things that might not match in the trying to match the metaphor of God to the metaphor of the larger consciousness system. You might have a mismatch there. The larger conscious system is not perfect. Okay, you might have a mismatch there. People perceive of a God as a perfect, infinite being, and the larger conscious system is not perfect at all. It just gets by. You know, it nudges where it has to nudge, and it's a probabilistic system. You know, it's not a perfect system. It's a growing, real system. It has flaws. It has rules, and sometimes the rules get disobeyed. Sometimes that matters, and sometimes it gets away with it, just like in this reality. You know, we have rules, and sometimes people flaunt them successfully. Sometimes they don't. You can't police up every speck all the time. And I think it's probably a good one-to-one. I think the larger conscious system makes a good God. You know, makes a good fits that definition pretty well. But everybody to their own metaphor. What's outside of it? What's beyond it? Yeah, hard to say. Is anything beyond it? You know, hard to say. Maybe. In my books, I get into I have a little fun with it, and I talk about the larger conscious system as maybe just a cell in a bigger animal. And I make some fun with an Almosaurus, and this is one cell of this bigger creature. So there's maybe lots of larger consciousness systems out there that all belong to a larger entity. Who knows? But now we're to the point that it really doesn't matter. You see, we've gone past the point where it matters to us functionally. It may matter to us in, like the tractors matter to the intestinal bacteria, but it doesn't matter to us in our day-to-day decisions, in our growth, in the things that we're doing here. It's not functionally important to us anymore. It just happens or doesn't happen, however it is. It's outside of our control, outside of our knowing. So in that case, I don't know. And how does the system work? Does it grow forever? Well, I don't know. Maybe it gets to where all the bits are used and then purges the least important bits and starts over. Or maybe it uploads everything to a larger entity until it gets the most coherency, the most order that it can get, the lowest entropy. It may upload everything, push a button, and reset. It's hard to say. We can think up all kinds of neat things in a digital format, but all of it's just conjecture and means little as far as what we're about here, which is growing up and becoming love. Okay?
First of all, I wanted to thank you for saying what you did about Jane Roberts and the notion of synchronicity and time, because it was that confusion that generated my question earlier about can we, in our next go-around, come back in different century. But the other thing that I find a little bit puzzling is at another time you talked about, we die, we, get consoled, then we sort of go through our life and look at it in a, purely non-emotional way and figure out what to do next and then go do it. But if you didn't have a great go-around and you're one of the people that's going to end up on the shelf, how does that work? And if in fact that's an incredibly scary notion to me, frankly. I do not want to be on the shelf. And the second thing is, if in fact that happens, it's sort of like survival of the fittest. So you'd think that we'd be getting better and better because those people who aren't doing a good job are on a shelf someplace. and so we're but we don't appear to be getting better and better.
Yeah. No, well, that shelf is just a theoretical shelf. You kind of go through all the possibilities of what could exist, and generally anything that could exist does. I would say most of the time, all the characters have the potential to grow up, right? They all have the potential to grow up, and you just need to find situations in which they can succeed. And it's like with your little children, you put up the basket for the basketball, but you only put it up this high so they can succeed. There's no point in putting it up to, NBA, height when you got a bunch of 8-year-olds playing, they can't throw the ball that far. You're just creating frustration. So I think the consciousness system probably is aware of that, and I suspect entities, maybe there's another virtual reality that's a little more coddling and not quite sink or swim. This is kind of a sink or swim place, right? You get here and here you are, do the best you can with what you got. Good luck. Bye, I'll see you at the end. It's that sort of thing. We'll nudge you a little, help you out. I'll give you a little buoyance someplace if you're starting to take on water, but it's, you pretty much sink or swim. So there may be other places that are a little more coddling and a little more hand-holding and a little more gentle, where you take those entities that aren't doing well and you bring them along a little, and then maybe you put them back in the game. Who knows? It depends on the system and what it finds efficient. What it finds efficient is for individuals like us to grow up, to work on it, to try to grow up. That's the efficient process. Why do I say that? Because we're here. If it wasn't efficient, if it wasn't a winning process for the system, we wouldn't be here. It's a winning process for the system because that's what the system chooses to do. Now, does it throw away the ones that don't work well? Is it more efficient for it to take those bits and start over? Or is it more efficient for it to try to reclaim those? I don't know. It would depend. How far gone are they, and how much trouble is it to replace? What are the resources? It's just an economics problem. You expend more resources, than you get credit by reclaiming, or do you do better if you start over? I don't know. But I wouldn't worry too much if I were you about, about being put on the shelf. I would say anybody who's making any effort at all, who has any desire whatsoever to grow and to reduce their entropy, to become more spiritual, anybody that has this, any inclination is one of the good guys that's part of the solution. Okay, we have a whole lot of people that haven't gotten to that point yet. So you're right up there and probably the top 10% of earners in this game. So I wouldn't worry about being put on the shelf. You're trying. You're making an effort. It means something to you, and that's all it takes. The system's not going to put away anybody who's making an effort. We're talking about people who are making a real strong effort to go the other way, being at risk. So.
Okay, so yesterday you were talking about the World of Warcraft and as a virtual reality and contrasting it with our own virtual reality. And I was wondering, is there going to be a time, and you juxtapose programming with evolution. Is there going to come a time when when the software in computers evolves rather than is programmed?
Yes. And I just saw a movie about that last night. It's called The 13th Floor. And Beth made me stay up until midnight to watch that movie. But I said that before. I said it in a couple of talks, and I did say it on Saturday. It's easy for us to see downstream. Downstream means, backwards in evolution. It's easy for us to see downstream. It's very hard for us to see upstream. So we look upstream and we say, oh, the larger conscious system, God, what is that all up there? Where do we come from? But now let's imagine looking downstream and how easy that is. Okay, here we are, and let's take Hewlett-Packard. And Hewlett-Packard makes a great big mainframe, and now we're 20 years from now, and it makes a virtual reality where the characters are actually conscious. Okay, first you get a conscious computer, and then 20 years after that, you get conscious characters in a conscious computer. Now, what if these conscious characters in a conscious computer start to generate computers and virtual reality games, and eventually they become conscious computers and conscious people? You see? Now, you look downstream and you can kind of see that. Okay, here we are, we make a Hewlett-Packard mainframe, and Hewlett-Packard mainframe becomes, and it makes a virtual reality that then becomes sentient, and so on. And we could see that. All right, that could happen. And those little, conscious simulation entities, can they see us up here? No, it's very hard. I mean, we're God, right? We're God up on this end. We're the mainframe. That mainframe is the larger consciousness system to them. But for us, it's just a mainframe computer. Now, when we look upstream, is that the way it is with us? When we look upstream and we see the largest consciousness system, is that just somebody's Hewlett-Packard? Is that just a big computer? Well, in my book, I call it the big computer, just kind of making that metaphor that you can think of it that way. So here we are, we're kind of stuck, right? We can see we're in a virtual reality because we get to our beginning and there's nothing there. So that's what happens when you're in a virtual reality. There is nothing before the Big Bang. And we can't really see too far upstream. We're blocked there. Now, if we happen to have conscious computers that have conscious computers, we can see all that. So maybe from the vision of outside the larger consciousness system, we're just fourth generation, computer game down here. It's a speculation, who knows? But it is an interesting idea. And of course the answer is that you can't see upstream because of the nature of the game. You can't see upstream very far.
One little aside, 2 professors from Stanford are offering a course in AI this fall, and 68,000 people have signed up.
Yeah, right, a field whose time has come. Huh? Yes, I think my prediction is that we will see conscious computers, and I don't know how long that'll take, but maybe 20 years, 30 years, it may not be that far off that we will see. Many of you may still be around kicking and reading headlines by the time we get a conscious computer. Now, the first conscious computer isn't going to be conscious like we're conscious. It's probably going to be conscious more like, a bumblebee is conscious, or maybe a cat is conscious. It's going to have very limited consciousness to begin with, but you know how it is with computer things. They just keep getting better and better and better, and things keep evolving. So I think, yes, we'll go there. See, consciousness isn't made. That's one problem that the AI guys don't get, and that's the one that has tripped them up more than anything else. The AI guys want to program consciousness. Consciousness is not programmed. Consciousness evolves. What you have to do is you create an environment. You have to have enough memory, you have to have an ability for the computer to change itself. It has to be able to modify itself. You have to give it a purpose. So when it modifies itself, it can tell whether, processing, so it can tell whether it's getting closer to its purpose or further away from its purpose. You have to give it all that. If you give it all, remember we had that slide with the attributes of consciousness? You give it all those attributes of consciousness, and then you just let it go. See, consciousness then evolves when you give it an environment which it can evolve in. That's evolution. Plants grow at 5 miles under the ocean, because they can. Consciousness, you just give them an environment and something will grow there if it can. That's the way it is with consciousness. So you don't program consciousness, because if you program it, it's deterministic. You have to just give it all the qualities it needs and then stand back and watch it happen. That's how you develop a conscious computer. And the limitations you put on that consciousness will determine what sort of consciousness it's going to be. If it's going to be a bumblebee or a cat, you can have things that have certain functionality, but not so much. If you want it to be conscious more like we're conscious, then you have to give it an environment sort of like our free will awareness, sort of like our consciousness. And there's no reason that can't be done in this hierarchy of mainframes, each one computing simulations in the next, because our reality is fractal. This is a fractal reality. So you see the fractal, and it's a process fractal, not a geometric fractal. Geometric fractals produce geometric results. That's why geometric fractals produce things that look like clouds and mountains and water, because we live in a 3D reality. So you get a geometric fractal, you get geometric representation. It produces a 3D thing. So that's why fractals produce images that look like nature, okay, because it's a geometry. This is a 3D reality. Process fractal takes this consciousness evolutionary process where you have consciousness, you have those attributes, it's self-changing, and it evolves. Evolution is the process. Now you can take that process and attach it to another process that's just like it, and attach that to another process, and you get a process fractal. You can look up process fractal and you won't find it even on Google, because I just made that up, okay? I made that up in my book. It's a process fractal. Nobody's looked at process fractals before, but it's another whole branch of mathematics that hasn't been invented yet. And you see little bits of it where you see these, what do they call it, cellular automata. It's where they have processes. They have little processes and little rule sets. And then they let those rule sets go. And the rule set's simple. If you get, it's like a graph, and if you get a block here that's 1, then all the rest of the blocks next to it are 1, or something like that. Just these little rules. Little processes, and they'll let those cellular automata go. And if you look at Fredkin, the guy that I said that came up with the idea that reality is virtual, he's been working in cellular automata now for the last 15 years. He's a real smart guy, and he's come up with conclusions about how cellular automata can compute anything. You can make those into a general purpose computer that'll compute anything. So now you have simple process rules that it will produce any result imaginable. You see, that starts to give definition to how this larger consciousness reality actually works down in the mechanics, down in the basic levels. So yes, we're going to end up with a conscious computer one day. It'll be small. We will give it limitations. We control its purpose. We can tell it what its purpose is. If its purpose is to lower its entropy, make more content, that'll be more like us. If its purpose is to serve us and answer our questions, well, then it'll be more limited than us. So, we will definitely go there. Our life and computers are going to be more and more intertwined as time goes on.
You'd mentioned about larger consciousness system having all the data. I'm just wondering, does that mean that the data for the future is predetermined and defined, or is it subject to change because of free will?
Yeah, it's subject to change. It's the probable future reality. It's just probability. You see, it's everything that could happen and the probability that it does happen. So it's just probability, and we change that probability all the time. It's a probability, as you go further out in time, the probability gets worse and worse, gets rattier and rattier, less credible the further out you go in time, because it's harder to predict things further away than it is to predict things close in. It's just a probable reality. There is no determinism. Determinism is a dead concept. You can't create anything that's of any value with determinism. There's I think, book 2, chapter something or other, has a long aside on free will. We're talking about determinism. I'd go there to look if you would like. But no, the future is not a done deal.
So our blueprint for each of our lives is ever-changing.
Ever-changing. We can take it wherever it goes. We create our own reality. It's like that social Brownian motions. We just bump and bang all around, and we can modify those probabilities with our intent, and we make the most. Things happen, stuff happens, and we deal with it. That's the name. That's basically the name of this game, is deal with it. So you get into the virtual reality, stuff happens, you have to deal with it. The way you win points is how you deal with it. You deal with it with fear, you lose points. You deal with it with love, you gain points. Okay, who is next?
How many virtual realities have you been to? How many do you think there are?
Virtual realities, they come in different types. There are virtual realities that I call kind of constricted. They have more constraints. Constrained virtual realities, I would call this physical reality of ours a constrained virtual reality. In other words, it has a very tight rule set that forces things to be just a certain way. And then there are other realities, like realities you get into when you're out of body, that are less constrained. It's a lot further, it's a lot more open. It's not nearly as constrained as this one. There's realities like the dream reality, that's not very much constrained. So you have different kinds. I'd say of the kind that are constrained, that are very much like this one, I've been to probably, 24 different realities like that. Realities that are not constrained as much, that are loose, probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 times as many. There's just a lot of different reality frames. And the reason you have different frames is that they tend to have different game plans, if you will, different procedures and policies, different ways about going about the same problem. In other words, this is not the only approach to the problem of evolution for the larger consciousness system. This is one approach, and this approach is working, but there's other approaches that it can take, things that are slightly different. When it ran that big digital bang simulation, it may have come up and it got something that was stable. It may have tweaked it a little bit and got something a little different, but it was also stable. Well, why not use that? Or it may have taken one that's stable. It may branch this one off. See, when it's digital, you can do all kinds of things. Let's say this one was digital and stable and doing very well, so it made a copy of it and started another one, because there's a lot of it's just chance. Both of them will probably evolve differently, right? You have 2 different things that might evolve differently. If we started all over now with one cell and let it see if it ended up in people, it probably would end up something totally different, because a lot of that is just chance, mutation. Does it work? And what are the conditions? And what are the conditions when? And things are different. So there are different versions of it running, different versions of the program running in the server, right? So there's lots. There's plenty to look at. And the only reason that you can come to the conclusion that these are different, well, it's easy with the ones that are very constrained, because they're just different. You're not on Earth, you know that. It's not the same kind of beings. They don't look the same. Things are just different. So you can tell that. But as far as the non-physical ones, what we call non-physical, the loosely constrained, they're real hard to tell where one of those stops and another one starts. But there are some places that are just it's like the policy is different. The approach is different. And you kind of get the sense, of a boundary. And suddenly, things work differently on the other side of the boundary. So there's lots of those around, but they're hard to differentiate. So I don't know for sure. When I say I've been in, maybe 4 dozen or 5 dozen of those or something, I don't know. Maybe it was all just different parts of one. I'm not sure. There's some things you just can't tell. It's hard to tell. You're making guesses. And sometimes it's very difficult to know things like that. So what I tell you is just kind of the way I feel about it now. Be skeptical. I am. I stay skeptical about all of it.
Are you or is anybody cataloging these realities?
No, I don't think so.
Any names or?
No, there's no need to. What's the point? Here we are, and what our purpose is to grow up. How the structure, how the larger structure is probably too far removed from practical decisions here about growing up. I'm a physicist, so I like understanding how things work. So I keep probing and asking and kind of making models in my head. But there's really no point for me to outline it because it's just my perception. It's my interpretation. I go out and I get data and I interpret it this way. If I start making, if I start writing it down and cataloging it and say, here's the various places and here's where I found it and whatever, somebody else would perceive it very differently. And I don't want anybody to look at my stuff, believe it, and then feel like, they're not doing it right if they don't get the same thing I get. It doesn't matter. It's better just let everybody go do their own exploring. And if you don't feel like exploring and you don't go out of body and it's just not important to you, no big deal. It's not really that significant a thing to have to do. Some of us just kind of are explorers and researchers by nature, and we don't help ourselves. We just do that. And other people couldn't care less. And as long as you're growing toward love, it doesn't matter.
I just have it might be I don't know what type of question it is, but I was just wondering, like you say that infinity is not real. Mm-hmm. And in academia, where calculus is so entwined with physics, mm-hmm. and they have the concept of infinity.
Right.
How does that play in?
Well, that's the very reason that I say it's not real. In mathematics, infinity is an abstraction. It's never a real endpoint. You see, you never get to infinity. All you do in mathematics, all you can ever do in mathematics with infinity is approach it. See, in the limit,
yeah.
Right? Yeah. Or you can get asymptotic to it,
yeah.
In the limit. You see, you never can get there. Why can you never get there? It doesn't exist. You can't get there, because if you could get there, it wouldn't be infinity. You see?
Okay.
It's bigger, it's the biggest, right?
Yeah.
If you ever get to the biggest number, you can always add 1 to it. Oops, you got a bigger number. It wasn't infinity, was it? Oh, you can add 1 to that one too, and it just keeps going forever. Yeah. You see, it's just an abstraction. It's not a reality. So you can't have anything real that's infinite, because infinity doesn't exist. It can never be attained. It's an abstraction. It's a concept, that's all. So I take my definition from mathematics and physics. That's where I get my definition from, and that's my infinity. Now, a lot of people use infinity as a metaphor. Infinity just means big. When it's bigger than you can imagine, we say it's infinite. The infinite universe, right? The whatever. Again, you're floating in an inner tube in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the infinite ocean. We know it's not really infinite. What do you think, a tiny, postage stamp, little tiny thing, like a little slim thing like a postage stamp would look like to a, nucleus of one of the atoms that's in one of the molecules of the paper? Man, it would look like it was infinite, right? It would be bigger than the larger consciousness system. It just would be totally infinite, because it'd be so big that it could hardly imagine it. So that's what I mean. So no real thing can be infinite, because infinite doesn't exist. It's only an abstract idea that you can approach, but you can never get there.
So it's an assumed thing for convenience.
Yeah, you just assume infinity is a concept. It's not a thing. You see, infinity is not a noun. It can't be a thing. It's just an idea. You approach it. So yes, the larger consciousness system is very, very big. And if you want to use the metaphor that infinite is very, very big, then you can call the larger consciousness system infinite. But it's not infinite in a precise logical sense, which means something that doesn't exist. That's why I say if it's real, it's not infinite. It's a finite system. And the reason that's an important distinction is because as soon as you say it's a finite system, because it's a real system, it's real, here we are, we're real, you know, it's a finite system, then it's got boundaries, you see? So suddenly, you've created boundaries. If it's got boundaries, it's got something beyond it. If it's got something beyond it, now you've got what this gentleman was talking about. You go beyond the larger conscious system, and what do you got there? Is that God out there? Yeah, now we're just naming things. So that's why it's important to say that it's finite. Because otherwise, if it's infinite, then there is nothing beyond it. Well, that is an impractical, illogical concept. So from a logical viewpoint, which is like a mathematical viewpoint, it's real, therefore it's finite, therefore it has boundaries, therefore there are things that we just can't know. You see?
Well, Tom, I've got to say, you've really got me thinking. On one of these questions, I use a biofeedback device, and which I approached with incredibly a lot of skepticism and a very open mind. But it's been a great tool. But I'm just wondering, they're sort of used to calculate and measure stress in the body with biofeedback. Do you think they work, and do you think they can have a consciousness? I mean, there's things that come up on the page like super consciousness and things like this. And I would just really like to get your take on what you think, if consciousness can be programmed into a device, or do you think it ties into the user's consciousness? Or do you think it's all bogus?
Yeah.
I'm open.
Yeah, the user's consciousness is for devices like that you interact with. Let's say dowsers. See, dowsers that's a device, right? And they have the stick or they have a rod and they walk around and there's water. Well, they're effective. You know, they'll find the water, and everybody uses them. You know, if you see a construction crew that drills wells, you'll see a guy get out and do dowsing. You know, it's not that people make fun of him and say it's silly. You know, that's what they do because it works. In the real world, you do what works. So there's a machine, if you will, that is a very simple machine that works, but it's the consciousness of the user. Now, there may be some subtle physics going on that nobody knows about, that you know, something else that affects, but probably not. That doesn't seem likely, but I'm open-minded, I'm skeptical, I don't know, but I would say it's probably the connection of the consciousness with the user. The dowsing rod has to be something that just tiny little bits of force can make it move. You know, it's like, sort of like the pendulum you put around. Depending on the tiniest little motions of your hand, that pendulum can swing this way or that way. It's really hard. It's like the Ouija board, you know, where your hand moves a little like this. You're getting things where the uncertainty in the motion is very large. Where you have large uncertainty, you have the ability of the system to nudge and to do things, to actually make like a interface with you through the device. So you get an interface with the larger conscious system using the device as an output format.
Okay. I'm just wondering how it might tie into the person that you're working with's consciousness.
Sure.
And do you think that you're actually, in your opinion, is it allowing you as the user to tap into that person's consciousness or unconscious is probably more what I see that it really provides me with?
Sure. Think of the person who's playing with the tarot cards, or however you pronounce that. Okay. They have a client, and the client comes up and wants to know what their fortune is, or the astrologist who's doing horoscopes for somebody to predict their future. There's a connection there. You have the astrologer or the person doing the tarot cards that has to be able to get in contact with that information, but they have to get into that contact of that information relative to that person, you see. So yes, there is a connection between all three, the databases, the client, and the person doing it. All three now are kind of connected in this exercise. So the person doing it is got to get into the database that affects the other person. When you have, there's a thing called Now, you'll tell me what it is. Somebody up there will tell me what it is. You put your arm up out here and they ask you a question, do you love your mother? You know, and they push it down. Kinesiology, yes, okay. You know, do you love your mother? Yes, you know, and it goes down like that because you really don't love your mother, right? Or you love your mother. Yeah, you really love your mother. So you do these things, and what's going on there? Well, if you've ever had it done to you, you know that it sort of works like that. Suddenly your muscles go weak, you know, or whatever. And what's going on there? Well, you have a connection between your consciousness, your history, your database, this practitioner who's doing this, their consciousness, their database, and all three of you, you know, the larger conscious system and you two are all in this interactive dance, and you're all cooperating. You get a client that comes in with your biofeedback, or you get a client that comes in with those cards, or this, and they're a skeptic, and they're bound to beat it. They're going to stay here and they're going to hold this thing stiff and whatever happens. Well, they can beat it. You know, it just doesn't work for them. They're not cooperating. I'm sure you can do that with biofeedback. If somebody comes in and they say this is nonsense and they just refuse to cooperate with the process, then they just don't cooperate with the process. It doesn't work because they're not saying, okay, I'll join this in I'll join this in three-part harmony. It's you and me and the larger consciousness system, and we can spread some data around here to do us all some good. Then, you know, you have to have connections both places. Yes, you and the client and the equipment and the larger conscious system are all playing together. The equipment becomes the output format of the data for the questions and the things you're trying to get to. The equipment becomes the output data. That's what you're reading. Okay.
I have a question. If we're here to grow, and we have several reincarnations, I'm a little bit puzzled as to why we would totally forget what we did in the last incarnation and start over again. Isn't that like the frog in the well that slipped down one and, you know, jumped up?
Yeah, no, there's a really good reason for forgetting, and it makes the process workable. Let's say that you have had 10,000 incarnations, and let's say out of those 10,000 incarnations, you know, you've had 8,000 husbands, 6,000 children, et cetera, et cetera. 16,000 mothers and fathers and so on, all of which you were close to and loved and were connected with. And let's say you remembered all of them. Wouldn't that just be a little much? You know? If you had that now and you were dealing with it, and you still had all the emotions, all the trauma, all the joy, all that stuff, from all of that, you couldn't deal with it. You just couldn't deal with it. And there's another reason why. So it's just not efficient to have that memory. Now that's your intellectual memory. Again, you do collect the learning. Your growth that you do gets collected, but you've got to re-actualize it each time. So one reason is just practical. You'd be overwhelmed with it all. Secondly, particularly the emotional aspects of it would be just terrible. Even if you could just intellectually do it, that'd be terrible too, but just think of all the Christmas presents you'd have to buy. So that's one reason. The other reason is what happens to us, we typically, the typical human being in this virtual reality, by the time they're ready to pass on, they've kind of backed themselves into a corner as far as what they know, what they've learned, and they're just kind of, they're no longer learning and growing. When you're 10 or 12 or 20, these growth steps come in leaps. Growth is fast, so you growing along. I mean, look at the difference between a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. A huge difference, right? The things they learn in 4 years is just amazing. Well, how much have you learned in the last 4 years? You see, have you changed as much as a 2-year-old to a 6-year-old? Oh, wow, no. You see, so the learning starts to slow down and gets asymptotic. We back ourselves into corner. By then we got beliefs, and we believe that we know what's going on, and this is it, and this is the way we're set. We're no longer too skeptical, or if we are, we've just given up trying, asking, and finding the questions. We don't care anymore, because the body hurts too much. We're not too worried about it. So you get into a point that it's time to start over. And you don't want to start over backed into a corner. You don't want to come into the next thing and saying, oh, okay, here are all my beliefs, here are all my fears, here are all my stuff, let's start again. It's like, no, let's not start there again. Let's erase all that fear and all that belief and all that being trapped in the corner. Let's start over where it's fresh. Now you get to trap yourself in a brand new corner. But you also have an opportunity not to get trapped in any corners. So it gives you a fresh start where you get rid of all the old junk. So that's why incarnation you have to come in fresh and relearn everything. Besides, times change. You'd come in, 20 years from now and you wouldn't know how to use a computer. And it would be better when you come in that your worldview was more in line with the worldview where you were coming, which means you learn it as you get there. Your worldview develops as an infant. So as you grow up in your world, you develop your worldview. And it suits the time because you're developing it in that time. You don't come in with a worldview. If you did, it may be mismatched. Okay.
So this is playing off of the question about infinity, which you answered. And so I'm wondering about eternity. And if there's no eternity, does that mean that time is going to stop at some point? And what would that look like?
Yeah, eternity is just an infinity in time. Infinity in size or infinity in number of anything is one thing, but infinity in number of seconds or number of delta t's is eternity. Same answer. There is no there is no end point in time, no eternity. We're in an evolving system. Evolving systems are open-ended. They just evolve. They do whatever they do next is because of what they did last time, and they just keep going. In a physical system like this one, the environmental pressures change. The things that say survive and procreate change. So evolution is going to change courses. We have all kinds of changes because as we go, the environment's going to change. So how we respond to it changes. In a consciousness system, they just have this one thing, and that's reduce your entropy. It's it's an information system. So more information, more content, lower entropy. And that's it, it just keeps going. Now, a system, if it's finite, only has a certain capacity, right? And if you only have a certain capacity, and you just keep evolving, do you ever get to the point where you basically just fill up the capacity? It's like your old computer, right? You just can't do anything else with it because the memory's full, and you can't stuff anything more in it. Can't load another piece of software. Okay, it could be that you get to a point where it's asymptotic. And what happens when it gets to be asymptotic? Well, there are several. Again, we can wave our hands in the air and we can speculate because we really don't know. It's outside our view. It's outside our view. We now want to look from a viewpoint that's outside of the consciousness system to answer that question, and we don't have that view. So we can't answer that question. It's beyond our knowledge. But we can guess. Well, it gets to the point where growth is slow and it's getting asymptotic. Look at all your bits, decides which ones are least productive, delete them and put them back in the game. Now you got a lot of memory. That means, let's look at your computer, means your computer's full. You go find the stuff you're not really using anymore and you don't need and you get rid of it. You run a sweep program that throws out all the trash. Well, it could do that. If there's something beyond that, it may just upload, start over. Or it may say, okay, we've run this game all the way to the end, right? It's kind of gone as far as it goes. Let's start over. You hit the reset button and start over again. See what happens next time. Don't know. Beyond our vision. But it doesn't end because time just keeps ticking as far as we can tell. There's no place that it gets to an end because it has to evolve. It has to keep changing. And even if it changes just by deleting the least useful bits, starting over, it'll still just keep changing. So I don't see an end in time. I think it's just open-ended. And I don't know how it relates to a larger system outside of the larger consciousness system. So I would just say that, no, what about this physical evolution here? When does it end? When the sun explodes? Well, it'll probably end here because we'll be inside the sun at that time. Everything will be crispy. So, maybe that's when this evolution ends. Is there something like that happening? Don't know. Have no idea the structures that this larger consciousness system might depend upon. It's hard to tell. again, the intestinal bacterium trying to figure out, about supermarkets. Just don't know. Any more?
I was wondering, in a sense, you represent a Western tradition that, because you're based in science and going beyond that, but in other societies, in other parts of the world, they have traditions that have evolved different sorts of knowledge. And for instance, in India, a guy named Sai Baba just died in the last year or so, and top-ranking Indian politicians were all expressing remorse, and Sai Baba did apparently very unusual spiritual things. And in other parts of the world, they get that sort of thing as well. Have you noticed, say, when you're out of body, have you come across beings that seem to be part of even traditions that are existent outside of this virtual system, that operate in other areas that just keep on going even after death?
I'm not sure about how to link that to people, to link these beings to those traditions. By the time you leave here, when you leave this reality frame, basically you don't just keep the trappings of this reality frame. So even if you had traditions that you were if Sai Baba, he would be a Hindu, I suspect. And if he had some sort of rituals and things that he did, and a group that he was a part of, once he leaves this reality frame, he's still that enlightened consciousness, but he's no longer, an Indian guru, and he no longer has those, that just falls off, that falls behind. That's like what he did here. Now it's done. Now he's just consciousness. What he's looking for is, what do I do next? How can I help? At that level of evolution, the question is, how can I help? How can I get back in the system and be of help? How can I help other people grow, raise their consciousness? Where can they go? And somebody may say, well, the way you can help, would be to be an Indian guru and deliver, enlightened discourse to that part of the world, or maybe not. Maybe the way you could help would be to be born in New York, to a millionaire, and grow up and become a beneficent CEO, who knows? So there's all sorts of ways that somebody could come back and help and be useful here. And at that level, that's what you're doing. You're coming here in order to be a light, to others, to help them find their way. So I would suspect that, no, it's not that he would go up there and he said, all right, I'm the Hindu, now that I'm gone, I'm the representative of the Hindus into the other worlds. That just all falls away. It doesn't make any difference, Hindu, atheist, doesn't matter. If you're evolved, then you're an evolved person. And then what you want to do is help. And if you help by coming back within a religion, it's fine. If you come back some other way and help, that's fine. Whatever you might want to do that suits your talents, your skills, your personality, and the data you bring to the table. Generally, when a person passes away, and this will maybe trounce on some of your beliefs, but when a person passes on, this reality role that they played, okay, they're a mother, they're a father, they're a child, they have all these connections, and some of them are very dear connections. Particularly maybe it's a mother who's young and has young children, she's really strongly attached, and she dies. Well, what happens to people when they die is that this reality, this virtual reality, fades. It starts to fade just like a dream. When you wake up from a dream, it's clear. It's there, it's right in your face, and then 2 minutes later, it's kind of dim, and an hour later, it's have a hard time remembering it. Unless it was a dramatic dream, it's gone after a bit. Somebody asked you, what did you dream 3 weeks ago? You'd go, I don't know, I remember I dreamt something. I always dream something, but I have no idea what it is. It just goes away, and that's the way it is when you die and go to the place where there's another virtual reality that's made just for transitioning out of this reality and getting you prepared to go back again. And that's where you end up, okay? Depending on how much help you need, depending on how much hand-holding you need to make the transition, there will be more or less help there to hold your hand and lead you through it. Or if you don't need any hand-holding, you just, you passed it head of the line kind of thing. You don't have to go through it. So you'll go to this reality frame. And in this reality frame, immediately your past life starts disappearing. But it doesn't take very long before it's just gone like a dream. And those things that, love you forever, and, we'll meet in the forever, and this, and I go and in my meditations, I meet up with my beloved whatever who died, 10 years ago, and so on. And these are nice sentiments, but it just doesn't really work that way. What you're interacting with is you're interacting with the model of them, if you will, the them that's in the historical database. Doesn't have free will, has all the memory, all the feelings, all the emotions, everything, all the potential. I mean, it's really them, but it's not a free will actor, okay? The free will actor has basically gone back in another virtual reality. If it's been, any time at all, they're going back. They're doing something else. They're not just hanging out. They're making use of their time. I mean, we're a working fluid here. We're part of this process of lowering entropy. Just don't hang out and say, I'm just going to hang back a while and take a break. That's not generally what happens. Generally what happens is you go back in. So these loved ones or whatever you meet, a lot of times when you die, one of the first things that happens, you'll be greeted by your loved ones. Uncle Fred comes in, and your mom or dad or whatever, people have predeceased you, and you meet them. But these are all just models. They're all just, it's like going to the historical database and you run into Uncle Fred there too, and you can talk to him and get information, and he can tell you secrets that only he knew. You can say, I had this little floorboard that I pulled up, and I kept a secret box there, and you can go look for it, and there it is. It's good information, and you say, wow, that really was Uncle Fred, because nobody else would have known that. Sure, well, but that's Uncle Fred in the database. It's got all his knowledge and all his feelings and everything there, so you can interact with him. When you meet these people upon dying that are your family, they greet you, but they're just models. It's not like that person died and now they're just sitting on a stool, waiting for you to die. And, maybe that's 20 years later. It's a long time to sit on a stool. They are off doing their thing. They're different now. It used to be your mom, right? And she died, and now it's George Smith, someplace. Now he's a burly lumberjack somewhere. It's not your mom anymore. He's got a different persona. He's doing a different role. So you get your mom because that's what you're looking for. And you get that because that helps you transition. It helps you forget. Everything's okay now. All right, I see my loved one. That's nice. This is going to be fine. You relax, you let it go, and that dream just starts to fade because now you're not uptight. The anxiety goes away. This transition frame is designed to reduce your anxiety. Because you come here, it's like waking up with a nightmare, right? And you have all this anxiety, all these things going on that were whatever, or even waking up with a really nice dream. It grabs you for a while, but then it goes away. It helps you go away to be distracted. So if you need a lot of distraction, not only do you get greeted, but they say, well, okay, we're processing you in now. What you need to do is go over there. Do you see that line over there? Go over there and get in that line, and you'll be taken care of. So you go over and get in line, right? It's just stalling you for time, because as you stand around, you forget, things go away. Suddenly, it's like, what am I doing here? Where am I and what's going on? Well, you need to go over and get with this group of people, and they were going to discuss, what happens to this. You're fine, everything's okay. Just go over there and wait. And you go over there, and eventually somebody will come around and say, well, let's talk about what you need to work on. Are you ready to go on and do something? By now you're bored, right? Yeah, let's go. Let's go do something. You've been hanging around what seems like weeks, and you're ready to go do something. You say, well, all right, what would you like to do? What do you need to work on? What are your weak spots? What do you really think you work on? You go, I don't know. I don't have any weak spots. And they say, well, let's take a look. And then they run your life by you, right? It's like watching the movie, and they run your life. And they can say, well, we think maybe you need to work on anger management. You go, me? Anger management? You got to be kidding. I was the sweetest person. Look, I did all these wonderful things. I helped the orphans. I did all this stuff. So then up rolls the movie, and there you are exploding, right? Your face is red, and you're mad, and you're being real rude to people. And you go, oh, yeah, I remember that time. But that was just an exception. That only happened once. And then they show you 4 or 5 more, And pretty soon you say, yeah, anger management. Let's work on anger management. And that's the way the process goes. And then eventually you come up with an idea of what you want to work on, what would be good, how you'd really like to do it. If you've got anything, again, if you're at the just beginning level, they don't go through all this, in and out, okay, because you're just looking for experience. If you're at a little higher level, then let's plan, let's make something that's more optimal for you rather than just throw in and take whatever you get. All right, so then you make some sort of plan, and you may decide to say, well, look, me and there's 3 or 4 other entities, we do this together. You know, and maybe you will want to do that together with somebody, or maybe not. Whatever, you know, you do that, then you get put back in, and then a lot of it becomes chance, because it's just that you have an opportunity, the probability that this will give you a good opportunity. It may not. Life may turn out different than you expect, you know. There's still a lot of randomness in how all those chromosomes go together and how it comes out. But sometimes you can fix that too. So that's what's going on. And then there you are again. Now you're again somebody's child, you're somebody's parent, you're this and that, and you have all these attachments, and then it just goes away after you die and you start over. So that's kind of the process of this dying process. You keep making the cycles round and round. Most of your attachments fall away very quickly, even though they're very strong emotional attachments, and you'll think never, you know, this is forever, we'll always be together here, the other realities, whatever, and, you know, my children, my little baby, but it all fades like a dream. You have strong attachments in dreams too. Terrible things are happening, you know, somebody's sick, somebody's dying, all this, you have this, but the dream just fades away. It's like that. Okay, we got more questions? I just created a question down here, I can tell.
So when you're talking about this virtual reality and how it has certain set rules and everything else that go along with it, now when we look back at a lot of these ancient structures, you know, that were built, they really don't know how they were built, or, you know, these really heavy stones that were cut with such precision and move long distances, and they have really no way to explain them. Now, would this kind of be stuff that was lost or people stopped believing in, and then that's why the rule sets became tighter and tighter? And, you know, they could also reverse the other way as people open up more to the possibilities of what may be, that they can start to expand these rule sets and open them up again, or?
Yes, that is possible. It's, you know, the rules, there's kind of different kinds of rules. You have your basic physics rules. For the most part, those don't change a whole lot. But as far as you know, let's look at it this way. Let's look at the psi uncertainty rule. That's a good one. Psi uncertainty says you can only modify things within the probability, natural probability, okay? But obviously you can break that. You can do things that are way outside the normal uncertainty. And you can do that because in the larger world, the overall uncertainty, there's still plausible deniability. So you're not going to create any problem with ruining the virtual reality. But what if we were more grown? What if we as a culture, most of us were on the path of love? Well, you could relax that rule a whole lot. You'd have a lot of people doing things that were way outside, you see, the box, because it wouldn't be abused. But right now, look at the world we have, and let's say that most everybody in the world knew that they could affect outcome of the future with their mind. Everybody knew that they could make it more likely that they got promoted if they worked on their boss's mind. Everybody knew that they could manipulate their children, their parents, their girlfriends, their husbands, their wives with their minds. Everybody knew that you could go in and talk to somebody and actually change the way they think about things. If everyone knew that, what kind of world would that be to live in, where everyone was trying to rip everybody else off and manipulate everybody else? And, all right, George, give me some money, you know. I want you to make me a loan, right? And you would be manipulating people. It wouldn't be nice. What would happen, we'd end up sort of like you have on both coasts of Africa. You have a lot of people. Everybody there understands that the mind can affect matter. That's obvious to the people that live on the coast of Africa. And they use that. They will use that. I will hurt you. I will make you die. I will make you sick if you don't give me money. You say, it's a confidence game. And that sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? But that is commonplace. You go to these places and that's just what people live with there. So you have a few people who have learned to control through, you know, have learned to lower their entropy through control, and they frighten the rest of the people. And it's not a pretty place to live. You wouldn't want to go there and live in that area. And we don't want this reality to turn into that either. That's why we have this nice psi uncertainty principle that keeps everything kind of calm, so we have plausible deniability that anything really ever happened that wasn't objective. And we'd like to keep it that way because people who would abuse this, we'd all rather that they just don't even know about it, that they don't believe it. We want them to think, oh, that's stupid, that's a bunch of trash, anybody who believes that stuff's an idiot. That's what we want them to think, because that keeps them out of out of abusing this sort of thing. So it's good. But yes, if suddenly our whole, if we were mostly loving people, we could relax that rule. It's not so much, it is part of the rule set, but it's almost like a policy. It's almost like company policy. It's that sort of thing. And that changes. And there were times in the past where the connections with the larger consciousness system were much more open. There was a lot more connectedness. We have the Greek mythology and we have the Roman mythology that borrowed off the Greek. There were times in the past where interaction with the larger conscious system, with the guides, with other things, was more immediate and more available. And that got to be not a good thing. And when it got to be not a good thing, it was suppressed. The rules were turned down a little bit, and it was like, let's not go there. It's not helpful. We're messing around with the experiment too much. We want these people to just interact and grow up. We can't have this squirrely stuff going on around them because that just adds too much variables, too much randomness. If you got a good school, some randomness is good. You need to have things to keep people's attention. You need to create things that are challenging all the time. So randomness is good. Stir the pot and, everything actually works better. But if you get too much randomness, too much stuff going on, then people get frightened. It starts pushing fear. People get power trips, you get all kinds of stuff going on that's counterproductive, and then you kind of turn the gain down on that. So yes, exactly. I suspect that's the answer you expected, that you've known that things have changed over the time. Yeah, they have changed. It's not always the same.
I was just wondering if you could get addicted to coming back to this reality, if it becomes an addiction issue, say.
Well, I don't know that it's an addiction, but you might say that it becomes convenient. Once you get used to this reality frame, this virtual reality, it's easier to play a game that you're used to and you know the rules than it is to go into a brand new one where you don't know the rules so well and it's a different kind of culture. So you do tend to keep coming back. You often tend to keep coming back within the same culture. Sometimes you go in different cultures, but typically you even stay within sets, within groups, because it's just, you're familiar with it. Now when you get to the point that what you need to learn is some open-mindedness and a little breadth to your scope, then you may be back in a different culture. You see, maybe a very different culture. But until then, you kind of stay in that because, you do better in your own crowd for a while until you kind of outgrow that crowd, and then you can expand a little bit. But it's not addictive in the sense that you can't help yourself. It's addictive in the sense that you get better and better at it the more you practice in it. So, this is our game. And when you get good at this game, when you get better at this game, most people tend to stay in it. They could go in some of these other virtual realities, and then it would be a different game altogether. Different rules, different kinds of things. And sometimes that's the right thing to do. Sometimes that's it's a better choice, but usually not. So usually we kind of stay in here and go around. Okay?
I'd really like to say on behalf of all of us, thank you so much, Tom, for standing here for 2 days on the concrete floor and for coming all this way to Calgary and for doing the past 40 years of work that you've done to grow up, to show us the way so that we can follow your lead. And I just would like to say thank you very much, Tom.
You're very welcome. Thank you. I hope everybody learned something here, and I hope they can take some things away that are useful. And I hope that I have not made you believe or disbelieve anything, but I hope I've given you some incentive to go find out and maybe add some tricks to your bag of tricks, do things differently, or at least think a little more out of the box. If so, then it's been a big success, and I'm glad I'm here.